Welcome into another edition of UNC Football Scouting Reports. I'm host Tommy Ashley. Jason Staples is the guy y'all are here to listen to. Inside Carolina's renowned and famous and infamous and very important football analyst. If you were listening to this, you most likely listened to our first episode, the safeties, earlier in the week. Jason, of course, breaks down upwards of 50 plus North Carolina current roster North Carolina players every season, every offseason, such as there is no offseason. Here we are, cornerbacks. Said, leaving last episode, that we would pigeonhole DeAndre Boykins into the corners. So here we are. Jason Staples, DeAndre Boykins is a guy who has made a lot of plays. Some teams were able to sort of exploit some of his flaws. Your rankings are interesting in this one. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Boykins is he's one of the more interesting players I looked at actually, because he was so important to the Carolina defense, and at the same point had some limitations that also hurt the Carolina defense at times. So he brought a lot of strengths to the table, also has some limitations, and how much he grows or what they do with that position this year I think is going to have a lot to do with the further growth of the overall defense. So yeah, he's an interesting case because I actually think of him as more of a he's an undersized big nickel, right? A big nickel is what a lot of it's the star position at Carolina, but it's what a lot of people call what used to be the Sam linebacker, and now virtually everybody bases out of 11 personnel where you got three receivers on the field. And so most defenses, their actual base is a five defensive back coverage, five defensive back personnel. So Boykins is in the spot that generally gets switched out. Usually the way that things work now is you have two kind of inside linebackers, your Will and your Mike, and then your Sam linebacker becomes the star, your Nickelback or whatever, and how you structure that position helps define what you are as a defense. Now, there are a few different ways of going about that. One is the traditional Nickelback, where you basically put a cornerback on the field. You put your third corner on the field, and now you've got three corners, two safeties for your five defensive backs. Another option is to go with more of a big nickel, which is someone who's it's someone who's more of a hybrid player, who's kind of a safety linebacker hybrid more than a, say, corner safety hybrid for that fifth defensive back position. And again, you could have just the straight corner position. So there's kind of three ways of doing it: corner safety hybrid, or safety linebacker hybrid. And the big nickel is usually kind of the safety linebacker hybrid. Boykins he's sort of in between. He's really a kind of a safety corner hybrid, but not quite. So he's kind of in between there. So in that sense, that's why I kind of call him an undersized big nickel, because in some ways he fills with the physicality and all of that of a more safety linebacker hybrid. He brings some, he's a rocked up, strong, physical kind of player for his size, and brings a little more physicality to the position than you'd expect from somebody who's listed at 197. He's more physical and plays bigger than 197 pounds. So that's kind of where I think of him, is he's more of of that kind of hybrid position, where I think he's less of a corner and more of a third safety, if you will, who fills that defensive back role that is defending slot receivers, defending tight ends, and filling the alley there against the run, often handling contain and blitzing off the edge, those sorts of things. And he was pretty effective at a lot of that stuff. I mean, he was very good as a pass rusher last year. When he blitzed, he brought it. He's got very good suddenness. He he's a pretty, in terms of overall acceleration and all of that, he's a pretty twitchy guy. He, accelerates fast, gets up to top speed fast, closes on the ball fast, does a lot of those things well. And that's really where those are important traits for a guy at that position. And I think that's really where his strengths are. He's a guy that basically is willing to mix it up with bigger bodies in the running game, and showed he's willing to come up and fill and take on big blockers and undercut things and do a lot of the dirty work that you need to have an efficient run defender. And actually, I'm looking right now at his Pro Football Focus grades on the scouting report that I've got here. They had him at a 79.6 run defense grade, which is really good. That's very good, especially from that position. Anywhere in the 80 range, and that's round up to 80. That's well above replacement level. I mean, that's solid production in that department. And that kind of characterizes where his real strength is. I think that the film kind of validates that. The place where he's more limited is kind of, if you just looked at the roster, if you just looked at how the paper, you would expect him to be more of a coverage guy at that height and weight. And really the surprising thing is, in terms of that, if you just looked at the paper, is when you turn on the film, he's not as strong in coverage as what you would like for that fifth guy. So, in that sense, he's more like a smaller, kind of twitchier, true Sam linebacker who's pretty good at that job as a Sam linebacker, but isn't a guy that you really want matched up one-on-one with some of the quicker slots and also even tight ends. I mean, that's where the tight ends, Michael Mayer and some of those guys took advantage of him because of their size. And he didn't have really the ability last year to cover either the really quick slots or the really big tight ends with the kind of success that you'd like to see. So that's really where he sits. Is he's been a solid player, but is not a true coverage nickel in that sense. And that's really where he's situated. And the other thing is, he took 931 snaps last year, which is incredible. That's a whole lot. And that means that they trusted him to basically do his job. And he was out there a lot without wearing down. So that's another plus in his department. Now, out of that 931 snaps, 2 sacks, 1 turnover forced, and 5 passes broken up, you'd like to see maybe a little more havoc generated from that position. The 2 sacks is pretty good from that position. But you'd like to see that just a little bit more activity against the pass, especially since when targeted last year, he gave up 105.9 NFL passer rating, which was the equivalent of Michigan starter J.J. McCarthy's season rating, which is, he's a good player. You'd like to see him cut that pretty significantly this next year and be a more reliable coverage player, especially against some of the verticals that teams kind of victimized him on last year.
Yeah, and I'm going to channel my inner corny Joey Powell. If I was to look at a photograph, what would be the ideal Nickelback? Who would be on that photograph? I always think of Cam Chancellor, but that's a big safety.
Yeah, that's a safety.
Yeah, he always comes to mind. But who pick me out 1 or 2 players that folks can put in their heads that's an ideal Nickelback, but you can still have success with Boykins and other guys.
Some of it depends a little bit on how you structure your defense. So who do you have at safety? Who do you have at corner to kind of work with in addition to that? Because if you've got 2 lockdown corners on the outside, then maybe you want a little bit more of a run filler on the inside because you can help with the safeties or whatever. If you have a really good coverage safety, maybe that changes some of these things. Funny thing is, and I'm probably going to get dinged for this because people are going to go, oh, well, that's because of his background or whatever. But the first 3 names 3 of the first 4 names that I can think of come from last decade's Florida State defenses. Mm-hmm. Derwin James is he's kind of that safety who can play like across the defensive backfield. And maybe you put him at safety rather than at nickelback as a rule. But if you got really good safeties and you want to have a dynamic nickel that you can kind of move around a little bit and do some things with, he's a guy. And then Javier Arenas from Alabama a few years back is more of the corner, kind of the smaller corner role who can do that. Actually, probably your ideal type is Tyrann Mathieu.
Right.
The honey badger from LSU a few years back. That guy, you put him at nickel and he will terrorize you. He's going to cause all sorts of havoc. He's going to find ways into passing lanes. You're not going to run by him. He's going to be able to cover you on the verticals. He's going to get into the backfield in run support and on blitzes. He's going to find his way into underneath stuff and generate havoc, get his hands on the football, force turnovers and all of that. That's probably your ideal. The other two that actually came to mind were LaMarcus Joyner from the 2013 Florida State team. He had been a corner who moved inside, and at about 205 pounds, he hit like a small linebacker, but had sub 11 speed in the 100 meters. So again, kind of that honey badger type, and it's that kind of player that you're really looking for in that sort of star nickelback kind of responsibility, where you're getting the hybrid who can cover like a corner, but really is more than that. That's really what you want.
Yeah, and for folks listening, those are some of the best to do it. So, not saying that Boykins needs to be that, but that if you had an ideal,
you'd love to have it.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find it, absolutely, it's a major thing.
There aren't very many Tyrann Mathieu out there.
Yeah, exactly. Talking cornerbacks at North Carolina with Jason Staples, Inside Carolina's football expert. Let's move on down the line. Oh, we're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Got to support them as they support us always. Let's move down the list. Legend Cavazos, transfer from Ohio State. I thought he showed some things late in the season last year. Still developing, still coming along. Jason, where did you sort of place him on the scale that you've created for these scouting reports? And folks can check these out on Tar Pit Premium message boards with the listings and all, how the numbers are relevant and all that. But Jason Cavazos, where is he?
Yeah, I kind of have him down at a floor of 5.1, where he's kind of the unpolished upside prospect who's got the high level physical attributes and traits that you would want for a guy who could develop into a difference maker, but just hasn't shown it on the field yet. So he's a potential guy, a high potential guy, an upside prospect, lots of the traits to be a really quality player on the corner, but just miles of development left. And I do think even this year, if he just gets certain things cleaned up, you're looking at a guy that can become a player that you can win with, and that can be a very reliable, plus starter on a winning team at the ACC level. He just hasn't been that yet, and he was not that last year. He was, to my eye, a little bit below replacement level last year at corner. And what I mean by replacement level is, okay, let's take this guy and let's replace him with another Power 5 level starter. How much does it hurt you? Like, just, you're going to go out and you're going to pick an average, Power 5 starter from one of the other teams in the Power 5. You go over, to NC State or to, Virginia or to, Boston College or somebody, and you take one of the corners off their team and you just stick it in that spot and you replace your guy with that. Are you getting higher or lower level of performance from that? That's the replacement level, right? And to my eye, he was a little below replacement level most of the year last year. I do think that in the last part of the year, he started to show some improvement, make some strides there. You look at against NC State, against Oregon, I thought he played better. He did give up that touchdown against NC State, but if you look at that touchdown, it was a perfectly thrown ball on a back shoulder where he's in good coverage position. And this is a theme with Carolina's defensive backs from last year. He just didn't finish. And that's the thing. If we're talking about the overall defensive back discussion, and I know we'll wrap that up later in the show with that, but one of the things that just kept coming up every time I would watch these guys and start looking closely at what they're doing is, dang, can you just finish? These guys would be, right there and then wouldn't finish. And he was one of those guys late in the year that had a couple of those type plays. But again, he's a guy where you look at the passer rating when he was targeted, he gave up a slightly higher NFL passer rating when targeted than Sam Hartman had on the year. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's not great, right? You don't want that. You want your outside corner to be given up, less than, say, a top 8 or 10 NFL passer rating on the year for quarterbacks. So that's kind of where he was last year. But here's the thing: when I look at him and I watch him on the tape, you're looking at a guy who is every bit of 6'1". He's got good length. He's every bit of 195 pounds. He tested with a 40+ vertical, and it does show up on the tape. So he's got that burst. He's probably mid 4.4s at that 6'1", 195. Those are some pretty tasty tools to bring to the table. I mean, if you're talking about, drawing up a prototypical corner, Legend Cavazos is, not far in terms of height, weight, burst, speed, all of that. He's not that far from what you would like to see on paper on that stuff. But it's putting all that to work for you so that you actually see that result that really hasn't happened. And a lot of that is, he did not play quite to his time speed because he's a guy that got out of phase regularly when it came to jamming. He's one of those guys where he was a little heavy-footed at times when he was in man coverage and was a little on his heels in press. And his hands and his feet were not always really well in sync when he was in press. So that's one of those things where you want your hands and your feet to work in concert so that you're mirroring a guy while you're trying to redirect him with your hands. If you lunge with your hands while your feet stop, or if you don't get your hand out at all while your feet mirror, either one can lead to a lot of free releases. And he was one of those guys that just didn't do a great job of redirecting or maintaining his position in front of guys as a press corner. And that leads to some of the problems that you see where he's suddenly chasing a guy out of phase. That means his hips are behind the other guy's hips, running downfield. The other guy's in a advantageous position while he's in trail or chase position. And then it's just hard to really win from that position on a consistent basis. And otherwise, he would have guys sort of run him off, and he would just not process quite quickly enough when he was pattern matching, and just be just a beat slow in recognition and reaction. And it's that stuff where that's the stuff that's slowing him down a little bit. If he can just speed that up a little bit as the game slows down for him, all of a sudden he becomes a much more reliable option as a corner, and he'll start to be able to take advantage of some of his physical traits. I mean, he bends well at the hips. He's got, the ability to sink his hips and drive on underneath routes when he knows that that's coming, when he's not just a beat off because he's, rushing and all of that. That's really where he can make that improvement. But I think there's reason for optimism, and I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with some of these corners with the new corners coach, with the change there, with the transition there. Because you see, I mean, I'm going to say some of the same things about some of the other corners in terms of what they showed in previous years about press technique and some of those things. If some of that stuff gets cleaned up, does it get cleaned up as a position group and all of them improve in that area? I mean, that's something that I want to monitor, because if so, you've got, again, this is not a guy who just doesn't have the physical traits to be good. He's a guy that could be pretty darn good if he can just get certain things cleaned up. And yeah, that's I guess the last thing to say about him is he's a guy that I'd also like to see become a better tackler. He's got the mass, the body mass to be a better tackler. He actually took on blocks on the edge with some physicality, which shows that it's not a matter of fear. It's not a matter of unwillingness to be physical, but he's an ankle biter as a tackler. He tried to basically take out guys' ankles too much and dive at people instead of really maintaining good leverage and tackling with proper fundamentals all year. And he missed just too many tackles on the edge where it's the difference between a 11 or 12 yard play and a 3-yard play. And that's a big difference when you're on the corner. It's that stuff that he's got to clean up. And again, it's just cleaning that stuff up to get to where he needs to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting take, and you're right. I mean, I think that is a universal thing that we've seen with a lot of these guys is what you just talked about with legend Cavazos. Moving on down the list, Marcus Allen. We talked about his brother earlier in the week. Derek Allen transfers from Georgia Tech. At the safety position, Marcus showed some skills, showed some talent. How'd you break him down, and what can North Carolina fans expect from him?
Yeah, this is a guy I'm really high on moving forward. I think he showed. So last year, first of all, as a true freshman, got 175 snaps, played starter role basically last couple games of the year, last 3 games or so of the year, and was well above replacement level as a true freshman. That's a good sign, right? That already tells you, okay, you got a guy who certain things were already clicking for him, and who was out there, and the moment was not too big for him, and he made some plays, and he got some things done. Didn't give up a ton of plays. You look at on the year, he gave up an 88.4 NFL passer rating and had a pass broken up in all of that. 88.4 is okay. Like you'll live with that. And you look at the overall performance on the edge. He didn't give up anything egregious. He did get beat on some things where it's like, oh man, you got to take that away. I mean, especially teams were able to run off on him and then hit the brakes, and it's the Top Gun thing. I'm going to hit the brakes and he's going to fly right by. There were a few of those last year. And he's another guy where even into the spring, he's got to work on the press technique. He's every bit of 6'1.5", has longer arms than the norm for that. My guess, just looking at him based on overall, just the eye test, he probably has like a 6'4", 6'5" wingspan, if not more. I mean, he's long. And I love, that's a trait that I think is really, really helpful for corners. As a former receiver, the long corners who can get their hands on you without necessarily mirroring you perfectly are frustrating. Mm-hmm. So his ability to get his hands on you and all of that should be really good. And he's a guy that against verticals just is a pretty natural player. But he's another guy where his press technique and fundamentals just need more cleanup. Even in the spring, he's a guy got on his heels a little bit too much at times. And he's a guy that stops his feet too often when he's trying to jam with his hands. So again, can he get to where he's consistently mirroring properly with his feet with small steps? Because there are other times where he stepped a little bit too big and got outside his frame. And when you get outside your frame as a corner, that's when you get turned around. If you can take small steps and stay in your frame, then you can move with the guy better than you would otherwise. It's just like defense on basketball. You take really big steps outside your frame and a guy can cross you over. It's the same kind of thing in defending press. And he's a guy that, again, he's a longer, a little bigger guy. It's something that you just have to really focus on, of making sure that over the course of an entire game, you're keeping those steps small, that you're mirroring along the line of scrimmage, and that your hands and your feet are working together in sync to make sure that you are not giving up free releases. Because again, if you're going to play on the line of scrimmage, the whole point is not to give a guy a free release. If he gets a free release, then you might as well be playing 9-10 yards off the line of scrimmage and driving on the ball. You're trying to disrupt some of that stuff and slow the offense down, get them out of rhythm a little bit with that. He's still got a ways to go with that. But I think he's, again, another guy that's probably mid to high 4.4s in the 40. He's not a guy that's going to get run by a bunch. I don't think he's quite as much sprinter speed as Cavazos, but he's not far behind in terms of his long speed. And he's got so much length that he's one of those guys where if he's in the picture on a vertical, he still may be able to get his hand up and disrupt vertical routes on that. A guy that I think can be a really good player in this league. I think he also a willing tackler. I mean, he missed a few, but he also had a couple tackles for or at least one tackle for loss that I remember, a big one against NC State, as I recall, on a screen, came flying up and took him out. He's a guy that's willing to fill against the run, do all of those things. So a lot to build on there. Other thing that I'd like to see, in addition to some of the technical stuff, he's about 180 pounds. I think I'd like to see him come into the season at like 190. That if he can add, 8-10 pounds without costing himself speed and be able to carry that through the season, I think that would go a long way for him. But I project him as the starter at one of the two corners. I think he's a guy that can be a well above replacement level kind of starter, not quite all ACC level this year, but a guy that is a quality starter on one side. And I expect to see him play an awful lot this year.
Yeah, and he stepped in when two guys that are no longer on the roster were not able to be out there, and sort of made some plays like you mentioned. A couple guys we're going to close with. I'm going to save your favorite for last. We'll go with Armani Chapman. Chapman, of course, been injured most of the spring. Was in a yellow jersey, red jersey at times, yellow jersey. Either way, not a full go, but was able to show some things during some of the open practices and then the spring game. Jason, he comes to Carolina from Virginia Tech. It's always interesting when players come from rival schools. You hear the noise from other schools' fan bases saying, you can have him. He wasn't any good. Take him. And then you hear teams that once talk, or fans that once talked bad about said player for that school now think he's going to be really good. You've had the opportunity to break down as much film as possible on Chapman. What have you seen from him that lends you to believe that he could be helpful for North Carolina this season?
Well, for one, he's got over 1,800 snaps of ACC level experience.
He's played a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of experience. Again, playing in the conference against the same teams he's going to be playing against, and playing in a Virginia Tech defense that puts a lot on their corners. I mean, they've going back to Bud Foster, and I think he was a Bud Foster recruit. He started under Bud Foster. So going all the way back to there, they like to press with their corners. He played a lot of press, and generally speaking, they were pretty well coached in terms of how they handled their press technique. There's a long tradition there of doing that. This is a guy that has been through that. He's been through the wars in the ACC. He's played well in the ACC, and he's done it as a boundary corner, playing against the best receiver on other teams and being a reliable player in press man kind of situations. That in itself, you just add that to the roster and you've raised the floor significantly, right? I mean, he was pretty decent last year, and some of the traits that he brings to the table, is he an elite cover guy? Is he a lockdown corner? No, he is not. He is a pretty darn good, reliable boundary type corner, but really where he brings it is he just going to highlight here. First of all, he's 208 pounds is what he's listed at. I think that's a legit measurement. So 5'11", 208. He's rocked up. He's a big guy. And you look at his missed tackle rate the last 2 years, and this is over 1,100 snaps, basically. 6.7% in 2021 and 4.3% in 2022. He missed one tackle in each of the last two seasons.
He gets his hands on you, you're going to the ground.
When he came up in run support, when he got near somebody in terms of a ball carrier to handle his run responsibility or against screens or whatever, that guy got on the ground. And that's a pretty good trait. right? I mean, that's, even if you got one trick, that's a good trick at corner, right? Now, the thing, and he has much quicker feet than you would expect from a guy as quick as big as he is. He mirrors really well. He's a patient player in press. He will let the receiver kind of come to him before he redirects, and he's strong. So he does a good job with getting his hands on guys and redirecting. He is a physical corner. That's what he does. Now, the downside is you're looking at a guy that is only, I would say, a mid 4.5 in the 40. I don't think he's any better than a low 4.5 in long speed. He's a guy that if the receiver does get over the top, he's not going to have the tools to really catch up all that easily. There's some guys that can run away from him. And we saw that a little bit in the spring where he gave up a long one in the 7-on-7 portion where he just got run by. And so, that's not ideal. And that's one of the things that makes him a little bit more limited. He is, and I said, as I mentioned, he's a good tackler, but one of the things about that is that he sometimes will let the player come to him in order to, be sure on the tackle. I'd like to see him be a little more aggressive and run support at times. But basically that's the read on him. He's a guy that against really fast receivers, he's probably going to need some safety support, and he can be, kind of a hard corner against those guys, but not that one-on-one, you're just leaving him on an island and, he's not going to get run away from kind of corner, but he becomes a solid option as a boundary type guy. A guy that I'm interested in, actually, he's a guy that once he's healthy enough to sort of see those reps, I'd like to see what he looked like on the inside, at that star position. And I think there should be a lot of competition for that star position this year. But with him at 208, 210, and being able to tackle like he does and having some of the short area quickness that he does and the physicality that he does, I mean, that's one place that I would think would be interesting is, do you want him at the boundary with those traits, or do you want him maybe slotted inside at times with those traits? Sometimes that's all you really want. So I think he's a guy that's going to play in the rotation whether he's actually a starter or not, he's going to play as though he were a starter, and he's going to have, 500 plus snaps this year as long as he can stay healthy. He's going to be a viable player in this secondary.
Yeah, definitely. I think he will be a key part of it. The Virginia Tech, North Carolina dynamic is very interesting. I'm impressed how you've upgraded the roster in the room there with you. But let's talk about who you think has really upgraded this North Carolina roster. That's Elijah Huzzy. I will preface your remarks by saying this. We're doing these Players Lounge interviews with Heels for Life, and we've been doing them. And to a player, when you ask, name one guy on the team that'll surprise people, everybody so far said Elijah Huzzy. Jason, tell us why.
This dude's a stud. This dude, you put on the tape a little bit and you're like, okay, well, that's an NFL corner. He, the best way I can put it is he looks like a soccer player with a little bit more thickness. He's a guy who when he moves his feet, when you look at his calves and his just overall build there, you're looking at a guy who moves like a top level soccer player. That's a good thing for a corner, right? A guy who can move and shadow and do all of that stuff at that level. That's what he looks like. And he's a little on the squatty side. He's not that long, which is something, like I said, I like guys who are really long on the corner, but it doesn't matter when you're that quick. And he's a guy that, in terms of his ability to mirror and to hang with guys, whether he's in a press man, jam situation, or whether he's in a zone and playing off, he's a guy that just in terms of his processing speed and his foot quickness and his ability to marry his processing speed with his foot quickness, you're looking at an absolutely a guy who could be, and I use this word carefully generally, but this is a guy who could be elite. I think he's very good at the very least, and is a guy that with good health and the right circumstances and all of that, could be a guy that is he's an NFL starter type. I think in the NFL, his role probably winds up being on the inside. And that's where, I think North Carolina against certain teams may well decide to take him to the inside on, again, let's say a team goes 4 wide on you on 3rd down. Maybe you put your 4 best corners on the field and you put Huzzy one-on-one with their slot receiver if you think their slot receiver's dominant. If they have a Josh Downs type, or, they do with the slots what North Carolina likes to do with the slot. Maybe you take your best cover guy, who also is a full 200 pounds. He's not a small guy. He's about 195 pounds. You put him on their best cover guy and just say, okay, you're one-on-one in the slot. He gives you some of those options. I think that's probably where his position in the NFL will be, although I think he's big enough and, he's fast enough to be an outside corner in the NFL. He's a guy that when so first of all, I think he's a mid 4.4 type player. And then when you look at what that allows you to do against verticals, he plays without fear against vertical routes. You see, he just he's not worried about getting run by on verticals. So he can play aggressive underneath because he's confident he's going to be able to catch up if you get a step past him. He may be wrong once in a while, but he's still going to be there to make the tackle. He does not get beat badly. And then when it comes to short stuff, the foot quickness and the ability to stick the foot in the ground with some stiffness and drive downhill, he closes on the football really, really well. And again, I think he could be really special there. I do think he's going to need to prove that he can handle the week-to-week grind of, the Power 5 type schedule. And he does have some room to improve as a tackler. But otherwise, I think this is a guy that I expect to be in contention for all ACC honors, first team all ACC type honors. I think he's going to be on NFL draft radars by midseason, most likely. This is a guy I'm really looking forward to watching. I mean, I think, he's a guy that is a thicker version, maybe a little faster version as well, of a guy like Asante Samuel, who's out in Los Angeles for the Rams right now. I think he's that kind of guy that could be, first 2-day type pick in the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. It was a little disappointing not to see him in the spring game when he was out and unavailable. We're talking to Jason Staples, Inside Carolina's football expert. The scouting reports are all over the Tar Pit Premium message board. Get on there and check them out. Jason, before I let you go, just give me a quick 2-minute type overview of this position room. Has Carolina upgraded this room from the 2022 season?
I do think North Carolina has upgraded the cornerback room for the 2023 season compared to what they had last year. On paper, you might not think so because you're eliminating a former 5-star recruit in Grimes, and then Storm Duck had been a good player for you before he had his injury, but really, Duck never quite got back to his pre-injury level, and Grimes was an effort minimalist in certain respects when it came to physicality and certain things like that, and didn't have quite the year that you would have expected from somebody with that kind of pedigree. I think what you did is you replaced Grimes with Huzzy, and I think Huzzy is an all-conference type player. And then you're replacing Duck with someone who replaced Duck already with basically the same level of play last year with Marcus Allen. And then to that, you add Armani Chapman, and Chapman is going to compete for that other role. And at the very least, that gives you more confidence in your backup situation, because you already have one of your main backups back with legend Cavazos, who should be a step further along than he was last year. And then, in place of your other backup, who was Marcus Allen, you have a guy who played, if you look at the Pro Football Focus ratings, played basically at the same level that Storm Duck did last year anyway. So essentially, to me, you've upgraded in terms of overall depth. You've got two guys that one of your backups is probably going to be one of your starters this year, and then behind him is a guy that played at the level of one of your starters last year, and then you're pulling in an all-conference type player for a guy that didn't play at an all-conference level. To me, that's where they are. I think they've got a chance to be pretty good on the corner. They're just going to have to get some more help from the defensive line, getting more pressure, which will, if they get more pressure from the defensive front, then that's going to make the corners look better anyway. But I think they will be better regardless. It's just a matter of how much better they look, and that's going to depend a lot on how much pressure they're able to get.
Indeed, that's Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. Been listening to special podcast segments, UNC football scouting reports. This has been the corners. The safeties was last week or earlier this week. We've got defensive line, edge, linebackers, all that stuff across the board with Jason. Of course, we're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Check out all the rest of the content on Inside Carolina. Rate us, review us, subscribe, all that good stuff. Jason, I do appreciate it, my friends. You have your hands full with these and with other things. It has been a pleasure listening to you power through it, my friend.